So
how did this all lead to KFD?
Well, that was Delphine was there in January of '57 when she saw all the things that we were doing. She just couldn't believe it. And of course, the word around India was we were just fortunate to have bumped into Japanese B in South India. On March 23rd, 1957, Saturday morning, about 11 o'clock, phone rang. And it was Ramchandra Rao, who had been on assignment to us as an entomologist during the days of Harold Johnson, had gone back to the Bombay Health Department as responsible for malaria control. And he said, I just got back from Mysore, and your annual report on my desk reminded me that I was going to call you. See, it's not always bad to be late with your annual report. This wasn't in January, this was in March. So he said, I just thought I'd tell you that the medical officer of Shimoga has reported monkeys dying in the forest. Well, at that point, and he wasn't so bold as to say, what do you think about yellow fever? He just said, monkeys dying in the forest.
Yeah. Click,
at that
click,
point,
click.
Harold Trapido, who had just recently arrived, poked in, and he'd been chasing yellow fever in Central America for years.
Right.
And I said, TR says that there are monkeys dying in the forest of Mysore. His eyes lit up. That was Saturday noon. By Monday morning, we had finished the next 3 days' work, working through Sunday, loaded up the car, and took off on the 550-mile trip to Mysore. We went to the district headquarters, sent a cable to the director of health saying, this is urgent, we're going directly to the site. The other thing, we'd had enough experience in India to know you never go on a single-purpose mission. You always have an alternative objective because it's a long way.
Right.
And so that's the reason we had all the cameras in the car. We were going to Bandipur to photograph the animals if this turned out to be a false report. And that's what came to be the story of Cassandra Forest disease film.
Great film.
Well, a third of it was taken before we knew what we had.
I see.
We were doing it to show our staff how you go about a field investigation of a suspect arbovirus epidemic. So anyhow, we got there to Shimoga, and the health officer said, oh, well, this report came from 55 miles away in Sagar. You'll have to see the secondary health officer there. So 55 miles, Dr. Not Prasanna, another Dr. Rao. It's like Smith in India. But he said, oh, I got that report from the primary health center in Ulvi. Well, we got to Ulvi, and within half an hour, the medical assistant brought in the carcass of a dead monkey. And on questioning, he said, oh yeah, the monkey was alive when I left Bargi village. So then we did our autopsy and put tissue specimens in 100% glycerin and the tubes. And this is where Sudan yellow fever investigation. I knew that blood remains unclotted in the heart for at least 2 hours unless there's a damaged heart. So if you're careful the way you shoot the monkey and miss the heart, you've got a receptacle of blood there for as long as 2 hours. And sure enough, we got about 40 cc's of blood out of that heart. And then went tissue by tissue. No evidence of jaundice, no evidence grossly of yellow fever. It was then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the day before when we were in Shimoga, we thought this might be bigger than we can handle. It was just trapping me and his driver. So we sent his driver with the specimens to Hubli, where he arrived about 5 minutes before the train from Bangalore to Pune. It's 500 and some miles from Bangalore to Pune. And that's the way the specimens got to the lab. And then we started out looking elsewhere for monkeys, sick or dead monkeys. And the first macaca radiata, the little monkey, the first monkey we got was a big Presbytus Entellus, about 50 pounds. But the little monkey, it's a close relative of macaca mulata, the North Indian rhesus. This is called a bonnet macaque. And the people had heard that we were looking for a monkey, and they had buried the monkey in cane pressings. You know, you run sugar cane through a press to get the syrup out of it.
Right.
And it's a marvelous insulator, so it stayed cold in there. And while I was doing the autopsy, somebody from the crowd, there's always a crowd in India, but, you know, 2 minutes and there's a crowd, wherever you are. But they said, is there a doctor in the group? And I said, yeah. Would you see some patients who have suffered from the monkey disease?
Wow.
So we went to the hut of the compounder where they'd mobilized 3 convalescents and 2 acutes, I think, or vice versa. But anyhow, 5 cases, and I examined them carefully. And they looked like yellow fever, a characteristic of which is a slow pulse and a high fever. You know, most diseases with a high fever has a high pulse. This is what we call Faggot sign. But we got convalescent sera from the 3 and acute sera from the 2, and we sent those separately to our Jap B lab in Vellore, so there'd be no confusion or cross-contamination.
Right.
And any legitimate isolations could be documented as original stuff. Well, to make a long story short, the monkey material inoculated in Pune came down in suckling mice, and adult mice, and suckling mice 3 days, adult mice 7 days. And then the human material sent to Dandawadi, who's now a senior deputy director, I guess, of the VRC. Put it into mice, and then we received a cablegram from him. Am shutting down mouse colony, have fever.
Oh, boy.
Going in hospital, but not before he'd reported the isolations from the human material.
Right.
And then subsequently we showed that antibodies in the human cases neutralized the virus from the monkey, so we knew the virus was the same. So 19 days after we'd first arrived in Sagar, we returned with the report. This is a yellow fever-like disease due to a group B arthropod-borne virus that is also killing the monkeys. I didn't hear till October. So then I began to move down here. And this was a whole new ballgame.
Well, I think of your early experiences in taking over viral and rickettsial diseases at CDC. It was pretty early on that you focused on Florida, wasn't it?
Well, we had this hemagglutination inhibition test evidence of VE infection in Big Cypress. And it had been questioned by Max Tyler, who forgot to put or his technician forgot to put the fresh serum factor in the Newt test, and they turned out negative. So the first thing to do was demonstrate that these were true antibodies to VE. And the other thing, it was agreed that if I came here, I'd have my own lab to work on arboviruses. So I recruited Fritz Forrester, who was an undergraduate then at Emory, to train as a technician. And then we got a hold of 3 reference viruses, one from Colombia, the old standard one from the Guajira Peninsula, and the Trinidad strain. And we set up 3 simultaneous neutralization tests with a reasonable number of negative controls, but all of the positive, HI positive, and all of them neutralized 2.5 to 4 logs of virus. So there was no question that what VE was in South Florida.
Right.
This was the beginning of the first long-term field operation of the different arbovirus components at Big Cypress Reservation. And this was at the time of the Cuban crisis. But I won't get into the details of that. But anyhow, by the end of the year, we didn't have VE. So in '62, we went back again, but this time they had the Tampa Bay outbreak of St. Louis encephalitis. So we had to postpone. By then, I had arranged with the National Park Service to collect in the park. And I knew most of the hierarchy there by frequent visits. And so we didn't get the virus out of mahogany hummock until 1963. Now, you know Chamberlain and Sudia, these masters of, and eventually Newhouse,
I know.
masters of mosquito collecting.
Mm-hmm.
So I pointed out on the map the possible places they might collect. In the Everglades, they consist of these hammocks between the sawgrass.
Mm-hmm.
And so they went off to collect mosquitoes. And when I went down to follow up, where should we come to the mahogany hammock, where the Park Service had built a walkway from the road, the parking lot, out into the mahogany hammock and around a circular walkway. And I asked Danny, well, how come you put your traps in here? Well, they built a walkway for us, and that was the easiest way to do it, so why not? And that's where they got the first Florida strain of VE. And that opened up a whole Pandora's box, which has added considerably to the list of viruses that are in that catalog.